Derek thought he won when he drained $500,000 and left divorce papers on the cold counter. He saw a weak housewife, forgetting never to war with the woman holding his backup passwords. He took my grocery money for his mistress, so I took the $15 million trust fund he spent 40 years waiting for. By the time he realized it, I was legally untouchable. My name is Kendall Brookstone. For the past 12 years, I have defined myself by the hyphenated titles I wore like badges of honor: wife, mother, homemaker, support system. I was the invisible infrastructure that kept the Brookstone household standing tall in the affluent suburb of Oakhaven. But before I was Derek's wife, and long before I was Lila's mother, I was a risk assessment auditor for one of the largest financial firms in Manhattan. My job was to look at a company, identify the structural cracks in their foundation, and predict exactly when and how they would collapse. I was paid to see the disaster before it happened. I was paid to be paranoid. Yet, as I pulled my station wagon into the driveway that Tuesday morning, the sun filtering through the perfectly manicured oak trees that gave our town its name, I missed every single red flag. I had just dropped my 8-year-old daughter, Lila, off at school. She had been babbling about her upcoming science fair project, something about baking soda volcanoes, and I had promised to buy the supplies later that afternoon. I walked up the stone path to our front door, digging for my keys, thinking about mundane things. I was thinking about whether to make chicken or salmon for dinner. I was thinking about the laundry piling up in the hamper. I was thinking about the life I thought I owned. The moment I stepped inside, the silence hit me. It was not the peaceful quiet of an empty house where everyone is safe and busy elsewhere. It was a sterile, vacuum-sealed silence. The hum of the refrigerator seemed too loud. The air conditioning vent rattled with a hollow sound I had never noticed before. My internal radar, that dormant auditor's instinct buried under a decade of domesticity, flickered to life. Something was wrong. The house felt lighter, as if the gravitational pull had shifted. "Derek," I called out, dropping my keys on the foyer table. There was no answer. He should have been at the office. He usually left before Lila and I even finished breakfast, rushing out with a travel mug of black coffee and a distracted kiss on my cheek. But his car had been gone when we left, which was normal. What was not normal was the strange void I felt radiating from the top of the stairs. I walked up slowly. The door to our master bedroom was wide open. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. But my eyes were drawn instantly to the walk-in closet. The double doors were thrown wide, revealing a devastation that made my breath hitch in my throat. It looked like a carcass picked clean. Derek's side of the closet was empty, not just messy, but systematically purged. The rows of Italian wool suits that I had meticulously dry-cleaned were gone. The shelves where his dress shoes usually sat in military precision were bare wood. His drawer of watches, his collection of silk ties, his leather weekender bags, all of it had vanished. He had not just packed a bag, he had packed a life. I stood there, my hand gripping the doorframe, my knuckles turning white. My mind tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. Maybe he was going on a long business trip, but he never packed this much, and he never took the wooden hangers. He had taken the hangers. Panic began to rise in my chest, a cold, expanding bubble. I turned and ran back downstairs, my footsteps thudding heavily against the hardwood. I went straight to the kitchen. That was where we left notes. That was where we communicated the logistics of our marriage. And there it was, a single sheet of paper sitting in the center of the granite island, held down by the salt shaker. Next to it was a thick manila envelope. I approached the island as if it were a crime scene. I knew what the envelope was before I even touched it. I could feel the legal weight of it from 3 feet away. I picked up the note first. It was handwritten, but the penmanship was rushed, jagged, lacking the usual elegant loops Derek prided himself on. "Kendall, I can't do this anymore. I feel suffocated. I need to find myself. And I can't do that here. With you. Don't look for me. I need space. Everything you need to know is in the papers. Derek. Find yourself. I whispered the words into the empty kitchen. You are 45 years old. Derek, you are not a college student backpacking through Europe. I ripped open the manila envelope. Divorce papers. The petition for dissolution of marriage. And right there, on the bottom line, was his signature. The ink looked fresh. Or maybe I just imagined it did. He must have signed this while I was making Lila's lunch this morning. He must have sat at this very table, drinking the coffee I brewed, and signed away our 12 years together while I was cutting the crusts off a sandwich. My hands started to shake. I dropped the papers and scrambled for my phone. I dialed his number. It did not even ring. It went straight to a generic recording telling me the customer was unavailable. I tried again. Same result. He had blocked me. No, 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 I muttered, my fingers flying across the screen. I opened the tracking app for his car. We had installed it for insurance purposes, or so he said. I tapped the icon. Location services disabled. He had planned this. He had planned every second of this. The realization hit me harder than the empty closet. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was an extraction. He had executed an exit strategy. I needed to do something normal. I needed to anchor myself to reality before I floated away into hysteria. I saw the electric bill sitting on the counter, the one I had meant to pay yesterday. I grabbed it. I would pay the bill. That was a solvable problem. That was a task I could complete. I opened the banking app on my phone. My Face ID logged me in. I went to the bill pay section, entered the amount $240.50, and hit submit. A red banner flashed across the top of the screen. Transaction declined. Insufficient funds. I stared at the screen. That was impossible. We kept a minimum of $10,000 in the checking account for monthly expenses. Always. It was a rule. I refreshed the page. Checking account $0.00. My stomach dropped so fast I felt nauseous. I tapped on the savings account tab. This was our safety net. This was the money we had saved for renovations, for vacations, for emergencies. Savings account $0.00. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. I tapped on the emergency fund, the separate high-yield account I had insisted we open when Lila was born. It was supposed to have $50,000 in it. Emergency fund $0.00. This is a glitch, I said aloud. My voice sounded thin and high, like a stranger's. It's a system error. The bank is down. But my auditor's brain knew better. Glitches do not result in perfect zeros across 3 different account types. Glitches do not leave you with nothing. I clicked on the transaction history. My thumb hovered over the screen. Trembling. The list populated. Wire transfer. International. 3:12 in the morning. $50,000. Wire transfer. International. 3:15 in the morning. $100,000. Wire transfer. International. 3:20 in the morning. $200,000. Line after line. It was a hemorrhage. He had sat there in the middle of the night, while I slept upstairs, and he had bled us dry. The destination code was for a bank in the Cayman Islands. He had moved it all offshore. Every penny, the college fund, the retirement savings, the liquidity from the house refinance we did last year. I dialed the bank's customer service number, my fingers slipping on the glass screen because my hands were sweating so much. I paced the kitchen while the hold music played a cheerful, upbeat jazz tune that felt like a mockery of my life. This is Sarah with Premier Banking. How can I help you today, Mrs. Brookstone? My money is gone, I gasped. Someone hacked us. Someone wiped out everything. There are transfers to the Caymans. You have to stop them. You have to reverse them. There was a pause on the line, the sound of keys clacking. One moment. Let me review the activity. The seconds stretched into hours. I looked out the window at the peaceful street. How could the world be so normal when my life had just been incinerated? Mrs. Brookstone, the representative's voice came back, cooler now, more guarded. I see the transfers. They were authorized using the primary security token and the biometric verification associated with Mr. Derek Brookstone. But I didn't authorize them, I shouted. I am the joint owner. You can't just let him empty the accounts. Ma'am, Mr. Brookstone is a joint owner with full rights of survivorship and full withdrawal privileges. She recited the policy like a robot. Legally, either account holder can access 100% of the funds. The bank cannot intervene in a domestic dispute regarding authorized users. Domestic dispute, I laughed. A jagged, hysterical sound. This isn't a dispute. This is theft. He stole $500,000. The transfers were valid. Ma'am, since the funds have already left the institution and crossed international borders, we cannot recall them without a federal subpoena. Is there anything else I can help you with? I hung up. I dropped the phone on the counter. It clattered loudly. The screen lit up again. A notification. This time from our credit card provider. Alert credit limit reached. Transaction declined. I opened the email. It wasn't just a declined coffee. There was a frantic series of alerts, a cash advance, a massive one, and then a notification from a lender I didn't recognize. Congratulations on your loan approval. The sum of $200,000 has been disbursed to the account ending in 4492. He hadn't just taken our money. He had taken debt. He had maxed out the credit lines and taken a personal loan against our joint credit rating, and he had transferred that cash out too. He had left me with zero assets and hundreds of thousands of dollars in liability. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The kitchen walls were closing in. I needed to find something real, something he couldn't transfer digitally. The safe, the wall safe in the study. I ran to the study, nearly tripping over the rug. I tore the painting of the ship off the wall and threw it on the floor. My fingers fumbled with the dial. Right to 24, left to 8, right to 16. The lock clicked. I yanked the heavy steel door open. Empty. The velvet shelves were bare. The stack of gold coins my father had given me. Gone. The diamond earrings from our 10th anniversary. Gone. The deeds to the cars gone. Lila's birth certificate gone. He had taken our daughter's birth certificate. The only thing left inside was a small, torn piece of paper. I reached in and picked it up. It was half of a photograph, our wedding photo. He had torn it right down the middle, separating the bride from the groom. He had left me the half with my face on it, smiling, young, and stupidly hopeful. My legs gave out. I didn't sit down. I simply ceased to stand. I crumbled onto the Persian rug, clutching the torn photo to my chest. It wasn't just the money. Money could be earned. Money could be replaced. It was the cruelty, the absolute mathematical precision of his cruelty. He hadn't just decided to leave yesterday. You don't open Cayman accounts overnight. You don't arrange huge loans in an hour. He had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every time he kissed me goodbye in the morning, he was planning this. Every time we sat at dinner and discussed Lila's summer camp, he was calculating how much it would cost him to disappear. Every time he made love to me, he was already gone. I lay on the floor of my empty study in my empty house with my empty bank accounts, and I let out a scream that tore through my throat like broken glass. It was a primal sound, a sound of a wounded animal realizing it is trapped. 12 years of love, 12 years of trust, 12 years of building a life, and he had liquidated it all at 3 o'clock in the morning for a fresh start. He thought he had killed me. As I lay there, gasping for air, staring at the ceiling, I certainly felt dead. I felt hollowed out, as if he had reached inside my chest and taken my vital organs along with the cash. But as the tears finally came, hot and stinging, a small, cold thought began to form in the back of my mind. It was a thought from the old Kendall, the risk auditor Kendall, the Kendall who knew that every system, no matter how carefully constructed, had a failure point. He had left me with nothing, but he had also left me with nothing to lose, and that made me dangerous. The pawn shop smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. It was a scent I had never associated with my life in Oakhaven, but standing there at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday, it filled my lungs. I placed a vintage sapphire necklace on the scratched glass counter. It was the only piece of jewelry I had been wearing when I walked out the door yesterday. The only thing not locked in the empty safe. It had been a gift from my grandmother. Not Derek. which made parting with it feel like a betrayal of my own bloodline. But I had no choice. The refrigerator was empty. The gas tank in the station wagon was hovering near empty. I needed cash, and I needed it immediately. The broker, a man with grease under his fingernails and eyes that had seen too much misfortune to care about mine, offered me $1,200. It was worth at least $3,000. I took the $1,200 without arguing. I folded the bills into my purse, feeling a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. This was what survival looked like now. It was gritty. It was immediate. It was humiliating. I spent the next hour at the grocery store, buying non-perishables and Lila's favorite snacks. I had to maintain the illusion. For Lila. The world had to keep turning. Mom had to keep making lunches. The pantry had to be full. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to breathe. That night, after Lila had gone to sleep asking why Daddy had not called to say goodnight, I sat in the darkened living room with my laptop. The silence of the house was no longer a void. It was a presence, heavy and suffocating. I poured myself a glass of tap water because the wine rack was empty, and I opened a browser window. I needed to know who she was. Derek was smart about money, or at least devious, but he was arrogant. He believed he was the protagonist of every room he entered, and protagonists like Derek rarely imagined they were being watched. He had blocked me on every platform, but he had forgotten that I knew his patterns. I knew he checked LinkedIn religiously to stroke his ego. I knew he followed the corporate accounts of his competitors. I created a fake profile. I became James Miller, a generic consultant with a stock photo avatar. Then I went hunting. I searched for the company Derek owned a minority stake in, Stratton and Oakley. I scrolled through the employee list. I did not know what I was looking for exactly, just something that felt out of place, a connection, a pattern. And then I saw her, Monica Vane, Director of Marketing. She was young, perhaps 26 or 27. Her profile picture showed a woman with sharp, predatory beauty, blonde hair styled in loose waves, a smile that showed too many teeth, and eyes that looked like they were calculating the net worth of whoever was holding the camera. I switched to Instagram. Her profile was public. Of course it was. Women like Monica did not live in the shadows. They lived for the audience. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrolled, and there it was. Posted 24 hours ago. The photo was taken in the business class cabin of a plane. Champagne flutes clinked in the foreground. Through the window, the wing cut through a brilliant blue sky. The caption read, "New beginnings with my true love, finally free." But it was not the caption that made me stop breathing. It was the hand holding the champagne glass next to hers. It was a man's hand, familiar in every line and vein. And on the wrist was a Patek Philippe watch with a distinctive navy blue face. I had bought that watch for Derek 3 years ago to celebrate his partnership. It had cost me $14,000 of my own inheritance money. Seeing it on his wrist, in a photo celebrating his escape from our marriage, felt like a physical blow to the stomach. He had not just left, he was celebrating. He was toasting to my destruction while drinking vintage champagne 30,000 feet in the air. I spent the rest of the night scrolling back. The signs had been there for months. Check-ins at restaurants I knew Derek frequented for client lunches, photos of gifts a designer bag, diamond studs posted on days when Derek had made large business expense withdrawals. They had built an entire relationship in the digital daylight, hiding in plain sight, while I was at home folding his laundry. The next morning, the anger that had been simmering overnight hardened into something cold and sharp. I dropped Lila off at school and drove straight to the city. I pulled up to the glass and steel tower that housed Stratton and Oakley. I needed to scream at someone. I needed him to see me. Even if he was in the Caymans, I needed to stand in his space and assert that I existed. I walked into the lobby, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I approached the security desk, a place where I had been waved through countless times as the boss's wife. "I am here to see Derek Brookstone's assistant," I told the guard, a man I recognized named Sam. Sam looked down at his console, then back up at me. His face flushed with embarrassment. He did not smile. Mrs. Brookstone, I can't let you up. Excuse me. I adjusted my purse, trying to maintain my composure. I just need to pick up some personal effects from his office. I'm sorry. Ma'am, Sam said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Mr. Brookstone issued a directive yesterday morning. All security passes for family members have been revoked, and he is on indefinite leave. His office is sealed. The lobby suddenly felt very large and very crowded. People were looking. Employees I vaguely recognized were glancing at me over the tops of their coffee cups, then quickly looking away. They knew. Sealed, I repeated, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. I can't let you pass the turnstiles. Ma'am, please don't make me call the supervisor. I turned around, my face burning. I walked toward the revolving doors, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on my back. Just as I reached the exit, a woman stepped out of the elevator bank and intercepted me. It was Sarah, a junior analyst who had attended our holiday party last year. She looked nervous, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Kendall, she hissed softly. Sarah, I said, trying to keep my head high. Did you know? She bit her lip and nodded. Everyone knew. Kendall. They have been together since the Christmas party 6 months ago. They would leave for lunch together every day. They stopped trying to hide it in the office weeks ago. We all assumed you had an arrangement. An arrangement. The word tasted like bile. No, I said, my voice icy. I did not have an arrangement. I had a marriage. Sarah looked down at her shoes. He emptied his office yesterday. Monica resigned the same day. They are gone. Kendall, they aren't coming back. I drove home in a daze. The humiliation was total. It wasn't just a private betrayal. It was a public spectacle. For 6 months, I had been the punchline of a joke I didn't know was being told. Every time I had stopped by the office to bring him lunch, every time I had called his secretary, they had all been laughing at me, the oblivious housewife, the fool. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it, a text message from a number I didn't recognize. I waited until I was parked in the driveway of our rental house to open it. We were renting this Victorian charmer while our main house, the estate Derek was so proud of, underwent extensive structural renovations. It was supposed to be a temporary adventure. Now, it felt like a trap. I unlocked the phone. The message was a single image followed by a line of text. The image was a grainy black and white ultrasound, a fetus, curled and tiny. The text read, "He needs a family worthy of him. Please don't make this difficult. Let him go." I dropped the phone into the cup holder as if it were radioactive. Pregnant. She was pregnant. That was the catalyst. That was why he had moved now. That was why he had drained the accounts. He wasn't just leaving a wife. He was starting a dynasty. He was replacing Lila with a new heir. One carried by a younger, more ambitious vessel. Worthy of him. The arrogance of those 3 words made my vision blur. I walked up the porch steps, my legs feeling like lead. Before I could put my key in the lock, the front door opened. Mr. Henderson, our landlord, stood there. He was a large man who usually greeted me with a jovial smile and a comment about the weather. Today, his face was like granite. "Mrs. Brookstone," he said, not stepping aside to let me in. "Mr. Henderson. Is everything okay? The check bounced," he interrupted, holding up a piece of paper. It was the rent check Derek had written 3 days ago. Insufficient funds, and when I called the bank, they told me the account is closed. There must be a mistake, I stammered, though I knew there wasn't. I called your husband. No answer. I called his office. They said he doesn't work there anymore. Mr. Henderson stepped closer, invading my personal space. I run a business. Mrs. Brookstone, I'm not a charity. This is a high-end property. If I don't have $4,500 in cash by Friday, I'm starting eviction proceedings. You and your daughter will have to leave. Mr. Henderson, please, I begged. the desperation leaking into my voice. I have a child. We have nowhere to go. Our other house is under construction. It's not habitable. Friday, he said, turning his back on me. Or the sheriff comes on Monday. He walked past me to his car, leaving me standing on the porch of a house that wasn't mine, with a husband who wasn't mine, and a life that was rapidly disintegrating into nothingness. I went inside and locked the door. Leaning my back against the wood, I slid down until I hit the floor. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. But then I heard the school bus screech to a halt outside. Lila. I forced myself up. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I pinched my cheeks to bring back some color. I put on the mask. When Lila walked in, I was in the kitchen, pretending to organize the pantry. "Mommy," she yelled, dropping her backpack on the floor. "Guess what? I got an A on my spelling test." "That's amazing, baby." I turned and hugged her, burying my face in her hair. She smelled like playground dirt and strawberry shampoo. She smelled like innocence. We sat down for dinner. I made grilled cheese sandwiches because the expensive salmon I had planned to buy was no longer an option. Lila ate happily, swinging her legs under the chair. "Mom," she asked between bites, "when is Daddy coming back? He promised he would help me with the volcano for the science fair this weekend." I looked at her. I looked at the trust in her eyes. She had no idea that her father had abandoned her for a new baby. She had no idea he had stolen her college money. She had no idea we were 3 days away from being homeless. Daddy is going to be gone for a long time. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice steady. "Like a month?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Maybe longer." "But he promised," she whispered, her lower lip trembling. "He promised." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a structural beam giving way under too much pressure. I looked at my daughter, hurt and confused, and the grief that had been drowning me for 24 hours evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was a sensation I hadn't felt in 10 years. I stood up and walked to the hallway mirror. I looked at the woman reflected there. She looked tired. She looked worn down. She looked like a victim. I hated her. I reached up and wiped the last tear from my cheek. I stared into my own eyes until the sadness receded, pushed back by the rising tide of fury. I wasn't just a housewife. I wasn't just a mother. Before I was Mrs. Derek Brookstone, I was Kendall Vance. I was the youngest senior risk auditor in the history of my firm. My job was to find the rot. My job was to look at a pristine, perfect corporate structure and find the one loose screw that could bring the whole thing crashing down. Derek thought he was untouchable. He thought he had committed the perfect crime because he controlled the accounts and the assets. He thought he was the smartest man in the room, but Derek was sloppy. He was emotional. He was arrogant. I walked back to the kitchen table and sat down opposite my daughter. "Eat your sandwich, Lila," I said gently. "I'm going to fix this." "You are?" she asked. "Yes." I looked out the window into the darkness where my husband was hiding with his mistress and his stolen fortune. He had taken my present, the watch, the money, the years of my youth, but he had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten that I held the secrets to his future. He had forgotten about the Brookstone family trust, $15 million. He thought it was ironclad. He thought it was his birthright. But I remembered a conversation from 5 years ago. I remembered a loophole. And I remembered that in the world of high finance, there is no such thing as an impregnable fortress. There is only a fortress that hasn't been audited yet. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to audit Derek Brookstone's life. And when I was finished, there would be nothing left but a zero balance. The number $15 million kept looping in my mind like a ticker tape. It was the only thing that made sense of the chaos. Derek was cruel. Yes, but he was also a mathematician of greed. He had not destroyed our family simply because he fell in love with a 26-year-old marketing director. He had done it because the timing was mathematically perfect. We were 2 weeks away from February 14th. For most people, That was Valentine's Day. For Derek Brookstone, it was the Holy Grail. It was his 45th birthday, and according to the terms of the Brookstone Family Trust, established by his late mother 30 years ago. The 45th birthday was the vesting date. On that day, at 9 in the morning, the trustees would hand over full, unsupervised control of the principal amount to the beneficiary, $15 million, tax-advantaged, liquid. Derek had been talking about this money since our third date. He called it the ironclad. He bragged that his family's lawyers were sharks who had structured the trust so tightly that no creditor, no government agency, and certainly no ex-wife could ever touch a dime of it. It was his golden parachute, and he had pulled the ripcord exactly 14 days before landing so he wouldn't have to share the landing zone with me. I sat in the dim light of the living room, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. My mind drifted back 5 years, a dinner party. Derek had been drinking expensive scotch, holding court in the center of our living room, boasting to a colleague about his financial future. "It is a fortress," he had slurred, swirling the amber liquid. My mother was paranoid. She locked it down tight. There are so many conduct clauses and morality stipulations, it is like living in a monastery until you hit 45. But there is a loophole for everything if you know how to read the fine print. He had laughed then, a wet, arrogant sound. I just have to be a good boy on paper until the clock strikes 12. Conduct clauses. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I sat up straight. Derek had always complained about the trust's restrictions. He hated the oversight. He hated asking the trustees for disbursements. He had mentioned once, in passing, that the bylaws were archaic, written by people who thought divorce was a sin and bankruptcy was a moral failing. I needed to see that document, but where was it? Derek had taken everything. The files in the office were gone. The safe was empty. Then I remembered. The basement. 3 years ago. Derek had thrown a tantrum because his laptop was running slow. He had smashed the screen in a fit of rage and bought a new one the same day. Being the dutiful wife who cleaned up his messes, I had taken the broken laptop, intending to recycle it, but I had shoved it into a box of old cables and forgotten about it. I ran down the stairs, not bothering to turn on the light, navigating by the gray glow of the street lamps filtering through the basement windows. I tore through boxes of holiday decorations and old clothes until my fingers brushed against cold aluminum. I pulled it out. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks. Shards of glass falling onto the concrete floor. It looked dead. I carried it upstairs like it was a holy relic. I found an HDMI cable in the TV console and plugged the broken laptop into our flat-screen television. I found the power cord and plugged it in. I pressed the power button. Nothing. "Come on," I whispered. "Please." I held the button down. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a whirring sound. The fan kicked on, sounding like a jet engine taking off. The television screen flickered blue, then displayed the login screen. I typed in his password. Winner, 1981. Derek was nothing if not predictable. The desktop loaded. It was a time capsule of our life from 3 years ago. There was a photo of Lila as a toddler as the background. I ignored the pang in my chest and opened the file explorer. I typed trust into the search bar. Hundreds of results popped up. Emails, drafts, tax documents. I scrolled until I found it. A PDF file named Brookstone_revocable_trust_amended_2010.pdf. I remembered this file. I had helped him convert it from a Word document years ago because the formatting was broken and he didn't want to pay his secretary overtime to fix it. I had spent hours aligning the margins, but I had never actually read the words. I had just been the typist, the formatting tool. I opened it. 240 pages of dense, single-spaced legalese filled the 60-inch TV screen. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of black coffee. I did not have money for food, but I had coffee grounds. I poured a mug, sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the TV, and put on my glasses. For the next 3 nights, I did not sleep. I ceased to be Kendall the wife or Kendall the victim. I became Kendall Vance, senior risk auditor. I dissected the document, I read every definition, every addendum, every footnote. The language was deliberately obfuscating, designed to make the reader's eyes glaze over so they would miss the traps. But I loved traps. Traps were my business. Page 1 through 50 dealt with asset allocation. Boring. Page 50 to 100 dealt with investment strategies. Irrelevant. Page 120 defined the role of the trustees. Standard. My eyes were burning. My back ached. It was 3 a.m. on Friday. I was about to give up when I reached Article 14. Section B. Preservation of beneficiary character and protection of dependents. I leaned forward, squinting at the glowing screen. In the event that the primary beneficiary demonstrates a pattern of gross financial malfeasance, criminal activity, or malicious deprivation of legal dependents prior to the vesting date, the Board of Trustees reserves the right to invoke the guardianship protocol. I read it again and again. Malicious deprivation of legal dependents. I scrolled down to the definitions section. What constituted malicious deprivation definition? 14.5. The intentional removal, concealment, or destruction of assets necessary for the basic welfare, education, and housing of the beneficiary's legal spouse or minor issue. My heart hammered against my ribs. Derek had drained the accounts. He had left us with zero. He had caused the rent check to bounce, putting our housing at risk. He had stolen the college fund, putting Lila's education at risk. He hadn't just been greedy. He had been legally reckless. I kept reading. What happened if the protocol was invoked? If the guardianship protocol is invoked prior to the vesting date, the primary beneficiary's rights to the trust principal shall be immediately suspended. Control of the trust shall be transferred to the court-appointed guardian of the beneficiary's minor issue, to be held in constructive trust for the sole benefit of said issue, until such time as the trustees deem the beneficiary fit to resume control, or until the minor issue reaches the age of 25. I gasped. The sound loud in the empty room. The court-appointed guardian of the beneficiary's minor issue. That was me. I was Lila's mother. I was her legal guardian. If I could prove that Derek had committed malicious deprivation before his 45th birthday, the $15 million wouldn't go to him. It would go to a trust controlled by me, for the benefit of Lila. Derek thought the trust was ironclad because it protected him from outsiders. He thought it protected him from a wife demanding half in a divorce settlement. He was right. If I sued him for divorce, the trust was separate property. I couldn't touch it. But he had forgotten the internal rules. His mother hadn't written the trust to protect Derek from the world. She had written it to protect the family name from Derek. She knew who he was. She knew he was selfish. She had installed a kill switch. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Today was Friday. Derek's birthday was in 11 days. The clause had a specific requirement for activation. Written notice and irrefutable evidence must be presented to the Board of Trustees no less than 48 hours prior to the vesting date. I had 9 days. 9 days to gather evidence that wasn't just circumstantial. I needed proof that he intentionally deprived us. Not just that he was bad with money. I needed to prove malice. Derek felt safe because he thought I was broke. He knew I couldn't afford the $500 an hour retainer for a high-powered divorce attorney to find this loophole. He counted on my poverty being his shield. He was right about the money. I had $1,200 from the pawn shop and an eviction notice looming. I couldn't hire a lawyer, but he was wrong about the capability. I didn't need a lawyer to read a contract. I didn't need a lawyer to find the evidence. I looked at the TV screen, the blue light illuminating my tired face. A slow, cold smile spread across my lips. You should have left me the grocery money. Derek, I whispered to the pixelated text. If you had left me $10,000, I would have just been a sad, divorced single mom. But you got greedy. You wanted the zero balance. He had activated the one condition that could strip him of everything. I stood up, my joints popping. I went to the kitchen and poured the rest of the cold coffee into my mug. I wasn't tired anymore. I needed a plan. I needed to act like a corporate spy. Not a scorned wife. I needed to infiltrate his financial life, track the money he stole, and present a package to the trustees that was so damning they would have no choice but to cut him off. The trustees were old money men, conservative. They cared about reputation. They cared about the Brookstone legacy. They didn't care about me. But they would care about a man who left his child to starve while he flew first class to the Caymans with a pregnant mistress. I grabbed a notepad and a pen. I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote 3 headings. Phase 1. Trace the stolen funds. Phase 2. Secure the evidence of malice. Phase 3. The boardroom coup. I looked at the notepad. It was pathetic, really, a piece of scrap paper against a $15 million empire, but it was all I had. Mom! I jumped. Lila was standing in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, clutching her teddy bear. Why are you talking to the TV? I quickly shut the laptop lid. Severing the connection, the TV screen went black. I was just working. Honey, I said, walking over to her and scooping her up. She felt heavier than she used to, or maybe I was just weaker. Is Daddy coming home for his birthday? She asked sleepily, as I carried her back to bed. He said we were going to have a big party. No, I said, tucking the covers around her. Daddy is having his own party. I kissed her forehead. But don't worry, I whispered into the darkness as she drifted back to sleep. Mommy is going to crash it. I walked back out to the living room. I looked at the black screen of the TV. The loophole was real. The weapon was loaded. Now I just had to get close enough to pull the trigger without him seeing me coming. I picked up my phone. I had one contact left from my old life. A man who owed me a favor from a botched audit I had helped smooth over 10 years ago. He worked in international wire transfers. I dialed the number. It was 4 a.m, but I didn't care. Hello? A groggy voice answered after 5 rings. Mark? I said. It's Kendall Vance, not Brookstone. Vance. Kendall, it's the middle of the night. What is this? I need you to trace a wire, I said, my voice flat and professional. And I need you to do it off the books. I can't do that. Kendall, I could lose my license. You owe me. Mark, remember the suspended accounts in 2015? Remember who didn't report you? Silence on the other end. What do you need? He asked finally. I need to know where $500,000 went after it hit the Cayman intermediary bank. I need the final destination, and I need it by Monday. That is impossible, he said. You are the best forensic accountant I know. It is not impossible. It is just hard. He sighed. Text me the transaction codes. I hung up. Step 1 was in motion. I looked at the divorce papers still sitting on the counter. Derek thought these papers were his freedom. He didn't realize they were just the opening act. He had started a war with a woman who had nothing left to lose, armed with the one thing he couldn't buy: the truth about his own money. I sat back down at the computer and reopened the PDF. I scrolled to the signature page. I stared at the name of the trustee chairman, Arthur P. Sterling. I knew that name. He was a man who prided himself on family values, a man who donated millions to children's charities. I wasn't just going to present evidence. I was going to tell him a story about a little girl whose college fund was stolen to pay for a mistress's penthouse. And I was going to make sure that when Derek reached for his $15 million, he would find his hand was empty. The sun began to rise over Oakhaven, casting long, gray shadows across my lawn. For the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold, calculating thrill of the audit. The books were cooked, and I was coming to balance them. The digital trail Mark provided was a roadmap to hell, but it was incomplete. My contact in the banking world had come through with the raw data, confirming that the $500,000 had not just sat in the Cayman account, it had been moved within 24 hours to a shell company in Panama, then split into 4 smaller transactions sent to a private equity firm in Zurich. To an outsider, it looked like aggressive diversification. To me, it looked like laundering. Derek was not just hiding money from me, he was washing it clean for someone else. But digital footprints were not enough to trigger the guardianship protocol. I needed something tangible. I needed the smoking gun that proved intent. I needed to know why a man who was about to inherit $15 million was desperate enough to steal his daughter's college fund. I knew where the answer was. It was not in the cloud, and it was not on the laptop I had cracked. It was in his physical backup. Derek had a paranoid habit from his early days in trading. He kept a black ledger, a physical hard drive, where he documented every gray area deal, every off-book loan, and every bribe. He called it his insurance policy. He used to keep it taped to the underside of his desk drawer at home. But I had checked there. It was gone. There was only one other place he would feel safe leaving it. His office at Stratton and Oakley. He had left in a hurry, clearing out his suits and his visible files. But Derek was lazy about the things he couldn't see. He had a false bottom installed in the heavy oak credenza behind his desk 5 years ago. I knew about it because I was the one who scheduled the carpenter to build it. Getting into a high-security financial firm after hours without a badge was a felony. It was also the only option I had left. I spent $40 at a uniform supply store on the edge of town. I bought a generic blue jumpsuit, the kind worn by the contracted cleaning crews that service the financial district. I bought a gray beanie to cover my hair and a pair of heavy rubber gloves. I looked in the mirror of the store's changing room. The high-powered risk auditor was gone. The betrayed wife was gone. There was only a ghost in blue polyester. I parked my car 3 blocks away from the tower at 10 at night. I knew the cleaning crew's schedule because I used to send Derek dinner when he worked late. The night shift started at 9 and took their break at midnight. That was my window. I waited by the loading dock, hidden behind a dumpster that smelled of rotting produce and wet cardboard. At 10:15, the service door propped open as a worker stepped out for a cigarette. I waited until his head was turned, staring at his phone, and I slipped past him into the service corridor. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face remained impassive. I grabbed a cleaning cart from the supply closet near the freight elevator. If anyone asked, I was the new hire covering for a sick shift. I took the freight elevator to the 34th floor. The doors slid open with a heavy metallic groan. The office was dim, lit only by the emergency track lighting running along the floor. It was a ghost town of cubicles and glass walls. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the HVAC system. I pushed the cart, the wheels squeaking rhythmically on the carpet. Squeak, thud, squeak, thud. Every sound felt like a gunshot. I reached the executive wing. Derek's office was at the end of the hall. The glass door was locked, but the keypad was an older model. I pulled a can of compressed air from the cleaning cart, something I had brought from home, and sprayed it on the keys. The keys that were used most frequently froze over with a white frost. 1981, his birth year. God. He was arrogant. I punched in the code. The lock clicked. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The office smelled of his cologne sandalwood and expensive tobacco. It made my stomach turn. I went straight to the credenza. I fell to my knees, ignoring the pain in my joints, and felt for the latch under the bottom shelf. It was stuck. "Come on," I hissed, digging my fingernails into the wood. "Open." I used a letter opener from his desk to pry it. With a sharp crack, the panel gave way. There it was, a ruggedized, black external hard drive, the black ledger. I grabbed it, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I shoved it into the deep pocket of my jumpsuit. Then I heard it, the heavy thud of boots on the hallway carpet. A flashlight beam swept across the frosted glass of the office door. Security? They were early. They weren't supposed to patrol this wing until 1 in the morning. I scrambled under the desk, curling myself into a tight ball. The door handle rattled. "Thought I heard something," a voice grumbled. It was Sam, the head of night security. He was thorough. He wouldn't just walk away. The keypad beeped. He was coming in. I looked around frantically. There was nowhere to hide. The desk was open-backed. If he turned on the main light, he would see me. Then I saw the ventilation maintenance hatch in the corner. It was too high. The server closet. Derek had a private server closet inside his office for high-speed trading. It was a small, soundproofed room to the left of the bookshelf. I crawled across the floor, moving as fast as I could on my hands and knees. I reached the server door just as the main office door swung open. I threw myself inside the dark, narrow space and pulled the door shut. Praying the latch wouldn't click loudly, it clicked, softly. I held my breath. Through the thin gap under the door, I saw the flashlight beam slice across the room. It played over the desk, the credenza, the empty chair. "Must be the wind," Sam muttered. I heard his footsteps walk around the desk. He stopped right in front of the server closet. I could see the tips of his black boots. I pressed my hand over my mouth. The air in the server room was freezing, kept at 60 degrees to protect the equipment. The noise was deafening, a high-pitched whine of cooling fans spinning at maximum velocity. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. If he opened this door, it was over. I would be arrested for corporate espionage and burglary. I would lose Lila. I would lose the trust. I would lose everything. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I had forgotten to turn it off. I froze. The vibration against my hip felt like an earthquake. Sam shifted his weight. "Hello?" he called out. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then, his radio crackled. "Sam, check the break room on 32. Someone left the coffee pot on." "Copy that," Sam said. The boots turned. He walked away. The office door closed. I didn't move for 10 minutes. I sat in the freezing dark, shivering violently. The server lights blinking red and green around me like demon eyes. I was trapped. If I left now, I might run into him in the hall. I waited 2 hours. 2 hours in a room that was colder than a meat locker. I couldn't feel my fingers. My teeth were chattering so hard, I thought they would crack. I used the time to think. I visualized the hard drive in my pocket. I visualized Derek's face when he realized I had it. At 1:30 in the morning, I finally dared to open the door. The office was silent. I crept out, my legs stiff and numb. I made it to the freight elevator. I made it to the loading dock. I made it to my car. I didn't turn on the heat until I was 2 miles away. When I got back to the rental house, I didn't sleep. I plugged the drive into the broken laptop. It was encrypted. Of course. But Derek used the same 3 passwords for everything. It took me 4 tries. Monica Forever was the winner. I wanted to vomit. I opened the files. What I found was not just financial misconduct. It was a suicide note written in numbers. Derek wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from everyone. I found the Black Ledger spreadsheet. It detailed 3 years of systematic embezzlement from client accounts, small amounts, skimmed off the top of high-frequency trades, enough that no one noticed individually. But collectively, it amounted to over $4 million. But where did the money go? I opened a folder named Servicing. There were scanned receipts for wire transfers to a shell company called Vostok Partners. I recognized the name from a watch list I had seen years ago. It was a front for Eastern European organized crime, loan sharks. Derek had borrowed money to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford: the cars, the watches, the trips with Monica. He had borrowed $2 million 3 years ago. The interest rates were astronomical. He was paying $50,000 a month just in interest, and he was defaulting. I found a scanned letter, dated 2 weeks ago. It was a threat. Payment in full required by February 15th, or we collect collateral. And then I saw the document that made my blood turn to ice. It was a forged loan agreement. Derek had used the Brookstone Family Trust as collateral for the loan. He had forged the signatures of the trustees. He had pledged the entire $15 million to the mob. That was why he needed the money on his birthday. He wasn't going to live on it. He was going to hand it over to Vostok Partners to save his life. And Monica. She was in deep. I found emails between them. She was the one forging the documents. She used her access to the marketing department's graphic design software to create fake bank seals and trustee signatures. She wasn't just a mistress. She was an accomplice to federal fraud. "You idiot," I whispered at the screen. "You didn't leave me because you fell in love. You left me because you are drowning." He had drained our personal accounts the $500,000, the college fund, just to make a good faith payment to keep them from breaking his legs before his birthday. I sat back. the magnitude of it washing over me. I had him. I had him on embezzlement. I had him on forgery. I had him on money laundering. I had him on associating with known criminals. My hand hovered over my phone. I could call the FBI right now. I could send this drive to the SEC. He would be arrested within the hour. But if I did that, the government would freeze his assets. The trust would be locked up in litigation for years. The mob might come after the estate. And I would be standing in the wreckage with nothing but a thank you from the prosecutor. No, the police were a blunt instrument. I needed a scalpel. I needed the trust to transfer to me before the law got involved. I needed to be the legal guardian of the money so that when the house of cards fell, Lila's future was already safe in a fortress that neither Derek nor his creditors could touch. I opened a new document. I began to compile the shadow indictment. I organized the evidence chronologically. Exhibit A, the theft of the college fund, malicious deprivation. Exhibit B, the embezzlement from Stratton and Oakley, criminal activity. Exhibit C, the forgery of trustee signatures, gross misconduct. Exhibit D, the debt to Vostok Partners, endangerment of family legacy. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It was lethal. I printed it out on the cheap inkjet printer I had bought for Lila's schoolwork. The pages came out slowly, one by one. I held the stack of papers in my hands. It was heavy. This was not just leverage. This was an execution order. I looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. Phase 2 complete, I said to the empty room. Derek was sleeping in a 5-star hotel right now, thinking he had 2 weeks to pay off his debts and live like a king. He didn't know that the woman he left behind had just become the judge, jury, and executioner of his financial soul. I hid the hard drive in the vent of the laundry room. Then I went to check on Lila. She was sleeping soundly, her arm draped over her eyes. "I got him, baby," I whispered. "I got him." Now came the hard part. I had to walk into the lion's den. I had to face the trustees' men who looked at women like me and saw only expensive ornaments, and I had to convince them to hand me the keys to the kingdom. And I had to do it while Derek was still celebrating his victory. The sun was probably shining in St. Bart's. I imagined Derek lying on a teak lounge chair, a cocktail sweating condensation onto a small glass table, with Monica next to him in something expensive and barely there. They were likely talking about the future, the yacht they would charter, the villa they would buy, the life they would lead once the wire transfer hit at 9 a.m. on February 14th. They were living in a bubble of anticipatory wealth. Blind to the fact that the pin was already in my hand, back in Oakhaven, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening snow. I sat at my kitchen table, which had become my war room. The shadow indictment lay in a neat stack to my left. My laptop hummed in front of me. It was time to pull the strings. I needed to keep Derek distracted. If he suspected I was making a move on the trust, he might try to accelerate the timeline, or worse, flee to a jurisdiction without extradition treaties before his birthday. I needed him paralyzed by a different fear, a smaller, more manageable fear that would keep him focused on the wrong enemy. I opened a secure, anonymous email browser. I attached a single PDF file. It was just 1 page from the Black Ledger, a spreadsheet detailing the consulting fees he had paid to a shell company owned by a local zoning commissioner to push through a building permit last year. It was bribery, plain and simple. Subject line: I know about the permits. Body: we need to talk, or the district attorney gets the rest of the file. I hit send. 3,000 miles away. I knew Derek's phone would ping. I waited. 10 minutes later, my burner phone, which I had routed the email replies to, lit up. "Who is this? What do you want?" I smiled. He was rattled. "I want $50,000, unmarked." By Friday, I didn't want the money. I wanted him to think this was a simple shakedown. I wanted him to think he was dealing with a disgruntled contractor or a greedy assistant. He replied, "I don't respond to threats. You have nothing." I sent one more attachment. A photo of the forged signature on the Vostok loan document. Silence for an hour. Then, "We can work something out. Don't do anything rash." Perfect. He was now looking over his shoulder, scanning the resort for spies. suspecting his business partners. He would never suspect the wife he left penniless in the suburbs. Monica would tell him it was just business, a cost of doing dirty deals. She would soothe him, tell him the trust money would pay off the blackmailer. And they would be free. They would huddle together in their paranoia, completely missing the real threat coming from the boardroom, with Derek occupied. I turned my attention to the true target, the Board of Trustees. I had found the contact information for the chairman, Arthur Sterling. He was 70 years old, a pillar of the community, and a man who treated the Brookstone Trust like a sacred religious text. He had been Derek's mother's lawyer. He viewed Derek as a disappointing, reckless child who needed to be managed. I drafted a formal letter. No emotion. No, he left me sob story. Just cold, hard facts. Subject: urgent activation of Article 14B. Guardianship Protocol re Derek Brookstone. Dear Mr. Sterling and members of the board. Attached, please find evidence of gross financial malfeasance and malicious deprivation of legal dependence by the primary beneficiary. These actions constitute a direct violation of the morality clause of the Brookstone Family Trust. I request an emergency closed-door session to present full documentation prior to the vesting date. Sincerely, Kendall Brookstone, legal guardian of Lila Brookstone. I attached the proof of the emptied bank accounts, the bounced rent check, and the unpaid school tuition. I did not include the criminal evidence yet. I needed to hook them with the protection of the child angle first. I hit send. I held my breath. It was a gamble. They could dismiss me as a vindictive ex-wife. They could call Derek. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. A blocked number. Mrs. Brookstone, a dry, gravelly voice said. This is Arthur Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice steady. Thank you for calling. These are serious allegations. Kendall, accusing a beneficiary of malicious deprivation is not a small matter. It is not an accusation. Arthur, it is a documented fact. My daughter's school tuition check bounced yesterday. Her college fund is empty. We are facing eviction. Derek has transferred all marital assets offshore. There was a long pause. And you believe this triggers Article 14? I don't just believe it, I know it. I read the trust. Arthur. Intentional removal of assets necessary for the basic welfare of the minor issue. He didn't just spend the money, he hid it to ensure we couldn't access it. That is malice. The board meets tomorrow at 10, he said abruptly. We can patch you in via secure video link. Do not speak of this to anyone, especially not your husband. If this leaks, we are bound by duty to inform him. I understand, I said. I will be ready. The next morning, I dressed for war. I put on a navy blue blazer I had saved from the closet purge, one of my old power suits from my auditing days. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun. I set up my laptop in the dining room, ensuring the background was a blank white wall. No distractions, no pity. At 10 o'clock sharp, the screen flickered to life. I was looking at a mahogany conference table in a high-rise office in Manhattan. 5 men in expensive gray suits sat around it. They looked like a tribunal. Arthur Sterling sat at the head, his face lined and serious. Mrs. Brookstone, Arthur said. You have the floor. You have 15 minutes. Thank you. Gentlemen, I began. I didn't look down at my notes. I knew this pitch by heart. You are the guardians of the Brookstone legacy. Your mandate is to preserve the principle and ensure it benefits the bloodline. You are about to hand $15 million to a man who has already pledged it to a criminal organization. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. The men shifted in their chairs. Excuse me, one of the trustees, a younger man named Davis, interrupted. Pledged to whom? Vostok Partners, I said clearly. Derek is not just irresponsible. He is indebted to loan sharks. He owes them $2 million plus interest. The moment you transfer that money on his birthday, it won't stay in the Brookstone accounts. It will be wired immediately to Eastern Europe to pay off gambling and business debts. And if he doesn't pay, they will come for the assets. They will sue the trust. They will drag the Brookstone name through a RICO investigation. I saw Arthur flinch. Do you have proof of this? I do. I uploaded the files from the black ledger, the forged loan documents, the threat letters, the emails with Monica. Look at Exhibit C. That is your signature. Mr. Sterling, forged, by his mistress. Arthur picked up the paper in front of him. His hand trembled slightly. He adjusted his glasses. This is a felony. It is, I agreed. Derek is desperate. He is dangerous. If you give him this money, you are not giving him an inheritance. You are financing a criminal enterprise, and you are exposing this board to liability for facilitating money laundering. I let that sink in. Risk, liability, these were words these men understood better than morality. What do you propose, Mrs. Brookstone? Arthur asked, his voice low. I propose you invoke the guardianship protocol immediately, I said. Suspend his rights. Transfer the control of the trust to a constructive trust for Lila Brookstone, with me as the sole trustee. And why should we trust you? Davis asked aggressively. You are the scorned wife. This could be a power play. I looked directly into the camera lens. Because I am the only one who found this. Your auditors missed it. Your lawyers missed it. I found it because I know how he thinks. And I know where he hides his lies. I don't want the money for myself. Draft the agreement so that every penny I withdraw must be countersigned by this board. Limit my spending to tuition, housing, and health care for Lila. I don't care. Lock it down. Just don't give it to him. I leaned forward. If you give him that money, it's gone in 24 hours. If you give it to me, the Brookstone legacy survives for the next generation. It is a simple risk assessment. Gentlemen, who is the safer bet? The room was silent for a long time. I watched them pass the papers around. I watched Arthur Sterling stare at his forged signature, his face turning a shade of angry red I had never seen before. Finally, Arthur looked up. If we do this, Derek cannot know. Not until the vesting date. If he finds out we know about the forgery, he might flee, or he might do something desperate. I agree, I said. Let him think he has won. Let him walk into your office on his birthday expecting a check. That is the only way to ensure he is physically present to be served with the legal notices. Arthur nodded slowly. He looked around the table. He saw the anger and the fear in the eyes of his fellow trustees. They were insulted. They had been tricked by a man they considered a boy. All in favor of invoking Article 14b? Arthur asked. 5 hands went up. The motion carries, Arthur said. Mrs. Brookstone, our lawyers will draft the transfer documents. You will need to sign them electronically by end of day. As of this moment, the Brookstone Trust is under emergency administrative lock. Thank you, I said. One more thing, Arthur added, his eyes narrowing. When he walks into that room on the 14th, I want you there. I blinked. Me. He forged my signature, Arthur said, his voice cold as steel. He insulted this board. I want him to see who took it from him. I want him to know exactly why he lost. I smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The screen went black. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had done it. I had stolen $15 million without leaving my dining room. But the game wasn't over. I had to keep the secret for 8 more days. I had to continue playing the role of the destitute, broken wife while Derek and Monica celebrated in paradise. I checked my email. A response from the anonymous account I had used to blackmail Derek. We have the cash. Where do we meet? I typed back. Wait for instructions. Don't make a move until I tell you. I would keep him dancing on strings until the very last second. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray afternoon. It was starting to snow. The flakes were small and hard, biting against the glass. Enjoy the sun, Derek, I whispered, because winter is coming for you. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the electric company. Hi, this is Kendall Brookstone. I'd like to set up a payment plan for my overdue bill. Yes, I know it's late. I'm expecting a large deposit in about a week. Until then, I just need the lights to stay on. I hung up and went to make Lila a peanut butter sandwich. We were eating cheap today, but next week, we were eating the rich. February 14th dawned cold and sharp, the kind of winter morning that sliced through your coat and settled in your bones. But for Derek Brookstone, today was not just Valentine's Day, and it was not just his 45th birthday, it was Coronation Day. The venue was the Starlight Ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. It was an excessive choice for a midday signing ceremony, but excess was Derek's love language. He had rented the entire floor. He had flown in orchids from Thailand. He had hired a string quartet, and he had invited a small audience, his lawyer, his business partners from Vostok, who were there to ensure their debt was paid, and Monica, who was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal. I arrived at 9:15. I was not wearing the grieving widow's weeds Derek probably expected. I was wearing a blood-red sheath dress I had bought 3 years ago for a gala we never attended. It fit like armor. My hair was blown out, my makeup flawless. Beside me, Lila held my hand tightly. She was wearing her best Sunday dress and a look of confused determination. I had told her we were going to a meeting to fix everything. She trusted me. The security guard at the door frowned at his clipboard. "Name, Mrs. Derek Brookstone," I said, my voice carrying over the sound of the violins tuning up. "And the heir apparent." The guard hesitated, but I didn't wait. I walked past him, pulling Lila with me. We entered the ballroom just as the waiters were pouring the first round of champagne. The room went silent. Derek was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a glass of scotch. He looked tan from his week in St. Bart's, rested, and victorious. Monica was draped on his arm, looking every inch the trophy he had bought with my money. When he saw me, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then reassembled into a sneer. He said something to Monica, patted her hand, and walked toward us. His stride was confident. Why wouldn't it be? He thought I was there to beg. "Kendall," he said, loud enough for his lawyer and the Vostok thugs to hear. "I didn't think you had the gas money to get this far downtown." "Hello, Derek," I said calmly. "Happy birthday." He laughed, a sharp barking sound. "You are tenacious. I will give you that. But you are crashing a private event. The signing is in 10 minutes. If you are here to make a scene about child support, save it. My lawyer will send you a check for $5,000 next week. Consider it a parting gift." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a wad of cash $100 bills, and tossed them at my feet. They fluttered to the marble floor like dead leaves. "Take a cab home," he said. "It is cold outside." Lila squeezed my hand hard. I looked down at her and squeezed back. "Wait," I signaled. "I am not here for cab fare." "Derek," I said, stepping over the money without looking down. "I am here to witness the transfer, as a concerned party." "Concerned party," Monica had drifted over, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "You are an ex-wife, Kendall, or you will be soon. You have no standing here." "Actually," I said, turning my gaze to her, "I have quite a bit of standing, about $15 million worth." Derek rolled his eyes. "Security." He waved a hand at the guard. "Escort Mrs. Brookstone out. She is disturbing the peace." "I wouldn't do that," a voice boomed from the other side of the room. Arthur Sterling walked in. He was flanked by 2 other trustees and a man in a dark suit who looked very much like a federal marshal, though he was technically private security. Derek's face lit up. He ignored the tone of Arthur's voice. "Arthur, you made it. I assume you have the final papers I'm ready to sign." Arthur did not smile. He walked to the center of the room where a long table was set up with documents. He placed a thick leather folder on the table. "The papers are ready." "Derek," Arthur said. "Excellent." Derek strode to the table, practically dragging his own lawyer, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, with him. "Let's get this over with. I have a plane to catch at noon." Derek picked up a gold fountain pen. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Watch closely. Kendall, this is what winning looks like. He bent down to sign. Ring. Mr. Henderson's phone buzzed loudly on the table. He frowned. I am sorry. It is the bank. I have to take this. It might be the confirmation for the wire setup. Derek sighed theatrically. Make it quick. Mr. Henderson answered. Yes, this is he. I am with the client now. We are… Excuse me. The color drained from the lawyer's face. He looked at the phone, then at Derek, then at Arthur Sterling. His hands started to shake. Are you sure? Henderson whispered. That is not possible. The vesting date is today. What is it? Derek snapped. Did the wire get stuck? Just tell them to push it through. Henderson lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Derek with the eyes of a man who realizes he is standing next to a corpse. Mr. Brookstone, Henderson stammered. The bank says the account has been flagged. The transfer is blocked. Blocked. Derek laughed. By who? The IRS. I paid my taxes. No, Henderson said, his voice barely audible. By the Board of Trustees. They have invoked Article 14B. The room went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Article 14, what? Derek spun around to face Arthur. What is this, Arthur? Some kind of joke? I'm 45 years old. The money is mine. Arthur Sterling stood tall, his face like granite. Article 14B of the Brookstone Trust. The Guardianship Protocol. In the event of gross financial malfeasance and malicious deprivation of dependents, the beneficiary's rights are suspended. Malfeasance? Derek sputtered. I haven't done anything. I have been a model citizen. We know about the forgery. Derek, Arthur said softly. The word hung in the air like smoke. Derek froze. Forgery? I don't know what you are talking about. We have the Vostok loan documents, Arthur continued, his voice rising. We have the forensic analysis of the signatures. You forged my name. You forged the board's seal. You pledged this family's legacy to criminals. Derek's eyes darted around the room. He looked at the Vostok men in the corner. They were not smiling. They were checking their phones. That is a lie, Derek screamed. She put you up to this. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is lying. She is just a bitter housewife. Show him, Arthur said to me. I walked to the table. I didn't look at Derek. I looked at the laptop set up for the transfer confirmation. I turned it around so he could see the screen. I typed in the trust account number. I hit enter. The screen refreshed. A large green banner appeared at the top. Account status locked. Primary beneficiary. Suspended. New custodian. Kendall Brookstone. Trustee for Lila Brookstone. Derek stared at the screen. He blinked. Once, twice, his mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Kendall, he whispered. You. Me, I said. I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. I took a sip. It was crisp, cold, and tasted like victory. It seems your mother didn't trust you either. Derek, she wrote a clause just for this moment. If you try to steal from your family, the family takes everything back. You can't do this. Derek lunged for the laptop, but the private security guard stepped in front of him, blocking him with a massive chest. It is done, Mr. Brookstone, Arthur said. The transfer of authority was finalized at 9 o'clock this morning. Mrs. Brookstone is now the sole legal administrator of the $15 million. You have zero access, you have zero authority, and by effectively immediately, you are trespassing. Derek stumbled back, his legs hitting a chair. He collapsed into it. He looked at Monica. Do something. Call someone. Monica backed away. Her hands were no longer on her stomach. They were clutching her Chanel bag. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on my name. You said it was ironclad, Monica hissed. You said 24 hours and we would be gone. It was, Derek pleaded. This is a mistake. The only mistake, I said, stepping closer to him, was thinking you could starve your daughter to feed your ego. I looked at Lila. She was watching her father with wide, sad eyes. She didn't run to him. She stood by my side, sensing the shift in power. Derek, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You emptied the college fund. You emptied the savings. You bounced the rent check. You tried to erase us, so I erased you. I have debts, Derek whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked toward the corner of the room again. The Vostok men were leaving. They didn't need to see the end of the show. They knew what a default looked like, and they knew where to find him. I know, I said. $2 million, plus interest. Good luck with that. Kendall, please, he begged, grabbing the hem of my red dress. They will kill me. You have to help me. Just sign a disbursement. Half, give me half. I will sign the divorce papers. I will give you custody. Just give me the money. I looked down at his hand on my dress. I reached down and peeled his fingers off, one by one. I don't need you to give me custody. Derek, I said, I already have it, and I don't need you to give me the money. I already have that, too. The silence in the Starlight Ballroom was shattered not by a scream, but by the guttural, animalistic roar of a man who realized his entire existence had just been deleted. You stole it! Derek lunged. It happened so fast that the champagne glass in my hand didn't even tremble. He threw himself across the 3 feet of space separating us. His fingers curled into claws, aiming for my throat. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, the face of a man who wanted to silence the witness to his failure. But he never reached me. The private security guard I had hired, a 6'4" former linebacker named Marcus, stepped in. He didn't strike Derek. He simply intercepted him. Marcus caught Derek by the lapels of his expensive Italian suit and shoved him backward with the casual force one might use to close a heavy door. Derek flew back, his feet tangling in the legs of a gold Chiavari chair. He crashed to the marble floor, taking a table full of crystal flutes down with him. The sound of breaking glass was deafening, a symphony of destruction that echoed off the high ceilings. Derek! Monica shrieked, but she didn't move to help him. She stayed frozen near the window, her hands clutching her purse like a shield. Derek scrambled to his knees, his hands bleeding from the shards of glass. He looked up at me, his chest heaving. That is my money. Kendall, my mother left it to me. You can't just take it. I didn't take it for myself. Derek, I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. I took a step closer, my heels clicking on the pristine sections of the floor. I know you think everyone is as greedy as you are, but you are projecting. I pulled a folded document from my red clutch. This is the deed of transfer I just signed electronically. The entire $15 million has been moved into an irrevocable trust for Lila. It is locked. I can't spend the principal on sports cars or penthouses. I can't gamble it away. It is preserved for her education, her health, and her future. Derek stared at the paper in my hand. So you get nothing. You did all this for nothing. I smiled. Oh, I wouldn't say nothing. You see, the trust requires a full-time administrator, someone to manage the investments, handle the taxes, and ensure the beneficiary is protected. The board approved a very generous management stipend for that role, $250,000 a year, plus full benefits and a housing allowance. For life. His jaw dropped. You are my employee. No, Derek, I am the CEO of your failure. I am getting paid $250,000 a year to make sure you never touch a dime of this money again. The color drained from his face completely. He looked at Arthur Sterling, who was standing by the door with his arms crossed, watching the scene with grim satisfaction. Arthur nodded, confirming every word. Derek sat back on his heels amidst the broken glass. The fight went out of him. He looked at his hands. I have nothing, he whispered. Vostok. They gave me until today. If I don't pay them $2 million by 5 o'clock, he looked up, panic flooding his eyes. They will kill me, Kendall. They aren't banks. They break bones. I know, I said. You should have thought about that before you forged the board's signature to get the loan. He scrambled up, slipping on the champagne-slicked floor, He turned frantically to Monica. Monica, Monica, baby, listen. Monica took a step back, her eyes wide. Don't look at me. Derek, this is your mess. No, no, we are in this together. He grabbed her arm, his bloody fingers staining the white fabric of her dress. The nest egg, the money we put aside from the Stratton accounts, the rainy day fund, we have to use it. It is not enough to pay Vostok everything, but it is enough to buy us tickets. We can run. We can go to Brazil. You said you had cousins there. Monica tried to pull her arm away. Derek, stop. You are hurting me. Where is it? Derek shook her. The account in the Caymans, the one we moved the skimmed profits to. There must be. What, $400,000 in there, plus the money Kendall said I took from the house accounts. That is nearly $1 million. We can disappear with that. I laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. Oh, Derek, I said, shaking my head. You really didn't check the ledger. Did you? Derek froze. He looked at me, then back at Monica. What is she talking about? Monica is a very smart girl, I said, walking over to the table where the rejected legal papers lay. I picked up another sheet of paper, a printout from the hard drive I had stolen from his office. She knew you were reckless. She knew you were borrowing from the mob. And she knew that eventually, the house of cards would fall, so she made her own insurance policy. I held the paper up. This is a transaction log from the rainy day account you two shared. Or the account you thought you shared. Show me, Derek demanded. Snatching the paper from my hand, I watched his eyes scan the lines. I watched the moment his heart broke. It wasn't when I took the trust. It wasn't when he lost his job. It was this moment right here. Transfer to account ending in 892, Derek read, his voice trembling. Recipient Monica Vane, private. Amount $300,000. Date January 10th. He read the next line. Transfer to account ending in 892. Amount $200,000. Date February 1st. He looked up at Monica. His eyes filled with a betrayal so deep it was almost pitiful. You emptied it. You emptied our escape fund. Monica stopped struggling. She looked at the paper, then at Derek. Her face changed. The fearful, innocent mistress vanished. In her place stood a woman with eyes like flint. I didn't steal it, Derek, she spat, yanking her arm free from his grip. I earned it. Who do you think did all the work? Who forged the signatures? Who cooked the books at the office while you were playing golf? You were the face, but I was the brains. I wasn't going to let you drag me down with you when you inevitably crashed. We were partners, Derek screamed. We were going to build a life. You are pregnant with my child. Monica laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. She smoothed the blood stain on her sleeve with a look of disgust. Oh, please, there is no baby. Derek, it was a negotiating tactic. I needed you to leave Kendall quickly so we could get the trust money before the audit at work happened. I needed you to be desperate. No baby, Derek whispered. You lied. Everything was a lie, Monica sneered. You are 45 years old. Derek, you are drowning in debt. You are weak. Did you really think a 26-year-old woman fell in love with your personality? I fell in love with the $15 million. And now that it is gone, so am I. She turned to walk away, her heels clicking purposefully toward the exit. I am going to Paris, she threw over her shoulder. Don't call me. Derek stood there, paralyzed. He had lost his wife, his daughter, his fortune, his legacy, and now, the illusion of love he had destroyed it all for. I wouldn't go to the airport if I were you, Monica, I said loud and clear. Monica stopped. She turned around slowly. Excuse me? I reached into my bag again. You are right. You were the brains. You did the forging. You did the electronic transfers. Which is why Stratton and Oakley were very interested in the file I sent them this morning. I walked over to her and held out a folded document. This isn't a plane ticket, Monica. It is a subpoena. She stared at it. You told them. I sent the entire black ledger to the compliance officer at Stratton and Oakley at 8 o'clock this morning, I said. Every forged invoice, every faked expense report, and the record of you transferring stolen company funds into your private account. Monica's face went pale. But I covered my tracks. You covered them from Derek, I said. You didn't cover them from a risk auditor. You left digital fingerprints everywhere. You bitch, Monica screamed. She dropped her purse and rushed at me, her hands raised, but before she could take 2 steps, the double doors of the ballroom burst open. This time, it wasn't a waiter. 4 officers in dark uniforms walked in, followed by 2 men in plain suits with badges hanging from their necks. Economic Crimes Unit. Derek Brookstone, Monica Vane, one of the detectives shouted, his voice booming across the room. Police, stay where you are. The air left the room. Derek looked at the police, then at me. You called them? I didn't have to, I said. The Board of Trustees has a legal obligation to report felony forgery, and Stratton and Oakley has a legal obligation to report embezzlement. Once I gave them the evidence, the system took over. The officers moved in. They were efficient, professional. They grabbed Derek's arms and pulled them behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was loud and metallic. I didn't do it, Derek yelled as they pushed him against the wall. It was her. She did the forgery. She has the codes. Look at the laptop. She tricked me. Shut up, Derek, Monica screamed as a female officer spun her around. He forced me. I was under duress. He threatened me. He said he would hurt me if I didn't help him steal the money. Liar, Derek roared, struggling against the cuffs. She masterminded the whole thing. She has the money in her account. Check her bag. She has a second phone. They were eating each other alive. The unholy alliance had dissolved into a puddle of accusations and cowardice. It was grotesque, and it was exactly what they deserved. You have the right to remain silent, the detective recited, looking bored. Anything you say can and will be used against you. I want a lawyer, Monica shrieked. I am a victim here. You are a felon, Ms. Vane, Arthur Sterling said, stepping forward. And you will be hearing from the Bar Association regarding your notary fraud as well. I watched them. I watched the man I had shared a bed with for 12 years, the man I had trusted with my life, being dragged away like a common criminal, spitting venom at the woman he had left me for. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked over his shoulder as they marched him toward the door. His eyes met mine. Kendall, he shouted, desperation cracking his voice. Kendall, tell them, I am a good father. Tell them it was a mistake. Don't let them take me. Vostok will get me in jail, Kendall. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I felt a small hand tugging at my dress. I looked down. Lila was trembling. Her eyes were filled with tears, terrified by the shouting and the police. Mommy, she whimpered. Why are they taking Daddy? I knelt down, turning her away from the scene. I cupped her face in my hands, blocking her view of her father being shoved into the freight elevator. Close your eyes, baby, I whispered. Just close your eyes and listen to me. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. It is over, I said softly. The bad part is over. We are safe now. Nobody is going to take our house. Nobody is going to take your school. I promise. Is Daddy coming back? She sobbed. Not for a long time, I said truthfully. But we are going to be okay. I stood up and lifted her into my arms. She was too big to be carried, really. But today she needed to be small. She buried her face in my neck, hiding from the wreckage of her childhood. I turned to Arthur Sterling. Thank you, Arthur, I said. Arthur looked at the empty doorway where the police had exited. He looked shaken, but he nodded. You saved the trust. Kendall, you were right. He would have destroyed it all by noon. I will be in your office on Monday to sign the final custodianship papers, I said. We will have them ready, Arthur said. He paused. You know, you are a terrifying woman. Mrs. Brookstone. I am a mother, Arthur, I said, adjusting Lila's weight on my hip. We are only terrifying when we have to be. I walked toward the exit. The ballroom was a disaster zone: broken glass, overturned chairs, spilled champagne. It looked like a battlefield, and in a way, it was. I walked past the table where the money Derek had thrown at me still lay on the floor. I stopped. I shifted Lila to one arm. I bent down and picked up a single $100 bill. I walked over to the valet stand near the entrance and tucked the bill into the pocket of the stunned young man working there. For your trouble, I said. The doors opened. The cold air hit my face again. But this time, it didn't feel biting. It felt cleansing. I walked out of the Ritz-Carlton with my head high, my daughter in my arms, and the sirens fading in the distance. Behind me lay the ruins of a marriage and the debris of greed. Ahead of me lay $15 million and a lifetime of freedom. I didn't look back. Queens never look back at the guillotine once the blade has fallen. The legal system is a machine, cold and indifferent. But if you know how to grease the gears, it can grind your enemies into dust with terrifying efficiency. Derek Brookstone was currently being processed at the Metropolitan Detention Center. The charges were substantial, based on the shadow indictment I had provided to the district attorney. He was facing multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, forgery in the first degree, and tax evasion. The forensic evidence from the hard drive was irrefutable. He wasn't just looking at fines, he was looking at a federal prison sentence of 10 to 15 years. But I wasn't finished with him. Criminal court would take his freedom, but I needed to ensure civil court took everything else. I needed a clean break. I needed a divorce decree that gave me sole custody of Lila and 100% of the remaining marital assets, ensuring he could never again lay claim to a single penny of my earnings or the trust. I hired Marcus Thorne. Thorne was not a family lawyer in the traditional sense. He was a corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers. He cost $800 an hour, and he was worth every cent. We met in his glass-walled office 3 days after the arrest. Thorne looked at the file I had prepared. "You have him by the throat, Mrs. Brookstone," Thorne said, tapping a silver pen against the mahogany desk. "But men like Derek, narcissists, they cling to control. He will fight the custody arrangement. He will try to use the child as a bargaining chip to get you to drop the charges or pay his legal fees." "He won't," I said, because I held something back. I slid a second folder across the desk. Thorne opened it. His eyebrows shot up. "This is evidence of his involvement with Vostok Partners' human trafficking ring," I said calmly. "It turns out the money he borrowed wasn't just for gambling. It was being used to finance logistics for moving undocumented workers. He signed the transport manifests. If this goes to the feds, he isn't looking at 15 years for fraud. He is looking at life for racketeering and human rights violations." Thorne closed the folder. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. "I see. And you want to offer him a choice." "Precisely," I said. "He signs the uncontested divorce papers. He grants me full legal and physical custody of Lila with no visitation rights. He waives all claims to marital property, including the house and any future earnings. In exchange, I lose this folder. The district attorney never sees it. He goes to prison for fraud, does his 5 or 7 years with good behavior, and comes out alive. If he refuses, I hand this to the FBI, and he dies in a supermax." The meeting with Derek's public defender was short. I didn't attend. Thorne handled it. He told me later that Derek cried when he saw the manifests. He signed the papers with a shaking hand. The divorce was finalized in record time. I was officially Kendall Vance again, though I kept the name Brookstone for Lila's sake. While Derek was rotting in a holding cell, Monica Vane was facing her own personal apocalypse. Stratton and Oakley didn't just fire her, they annihilated her professional existence. They filed a civil suit against her for the $300,000 she had embezzled, plus damages, because I had frozen the rainy day account by flagging it as fraudulent activity linked to the trust investigation. She couldn't access the money she had stolen from Derek. Her assets were frozen. Her luxury apartment was seized by the bank. Her leased BMW was repossessed. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved back in with her parents in Ohio. But not before being served with 3 different lawsuits. She would spend the next decade paying off legal fees. She was uninsurable and unemployable in the finance sector. She was erased, with the divorce signed and the immediate threats neutralized. I turned my attention to a piece of unfinished business: the apartment. Derek and Monica had been in the final stages of purchasing a penthouse in the Marina District. It was a stunning property, 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the harbor. They had put down a non-refundable deposit using the money Derek stole from our savings. When the sale fell through due to his arrest, the property went back on the market as a distressed asset. I bought it. I didn't use the trust principal. I used a low-interest loan secured against my new salary as the trust administrator. I purchased it under a limited liability company I named Second Chance Holdings. I walked through the empty rooms a week after closing. It smelled of fresh paint and expensive potential. This was the place where Derek had planned to start his new life without us. "It's beautiful," my friend Sarah said, walking beside me. "Are you going to live here?" "No," I said, running my hand along the quartz countertop Monica had likely picked out. "I have a home. This place is for women who don't." I turned the apartment into a transitional safe house for women escaping economic abuse. I partnered with a local shelter to provide housing for mothers who, like me, had been stripped of their financial independence by controlling partners. They could stay here for 6 months, rent-free, while they rebuilt their credit and found jobs. It was the ultimate irony. The nest Derek tried to build for his mistress would now shelter the very women men like him tried to destroy. 2 weeks later, I received a notification that Derek had been transferred to the county jail to await his sentencing hearing. His lawyer requested a visit. He claimed Derek wanted to apologize and discuss final logistics. I didn't have to go. Thorne advised against it. But I needed closure. I needed to see the balance sheet zeroed out with my own eyes. The jail smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. I sat on a metal stool on the visitor's side of the thick plexiglass. I wore a gray business suit, impeccable and sharp. I looked like the auditor I was. Derek was let in. He looked terrible. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was greasy and unkempt. He sat down, avoiding my eyes at first. "Kendall," he croaked. He picked up the phone receiver. I picked up mine. "Hello, Derek. I wanted to say, I am sorry," he began, the words sounding rehearsed. "I messed up. I know that now. Being in here, it gives you time to think." "You didn't mess up, Derek," I said coldly. "You calculated. You just used the wrong formula." He looked up, tears brimming in his eyes. "I can fix this. When I get out, maybe we can try again. For Lila, I signed the papers, just like you wanted. I gave you everything." "You didn't give me anything," I corrected him. "I took it. There is a difference." "I have nothing, Kendall," he whispered, a sob breaking through. "They seized my car. They seized my watch. I don't even have money for the commissary. I am starving in here. Can you just put a little money on my books? Just a few $100s, please, for old time's sake." I looked at the man I had married. I looked for a shred of pity in my heart. I audited my emotions. Searching for empathy, I found none. "Actually," I said, reaching into my briefcase, "I brought you something." His eyes lit up with pathetic hope. "You did." I slid a small, blue passbook under the slot in the glass. He grabbed it with trembling fingers. He opened it. "What is this?" he asked, staring at the page. "That is a savings account I opened in your name this morning," I said. "I deposited the exact amount of money you left in our joint checking account the day you walked out." He read the number, $247.83. "It is all there," I said. $247.83. That is your startup capital. Derek, You always said you were a financial genius. You said you could build an empire from nothing. Well, here is your chance." He stared at me, his face crumbling. "Kendall, this isn't even enough for a month of commissary. This is cruel. Cruelty is draining your daughter's college fund to pay a mistress," I said, standing up. This is just accounting. I balanced the ledger. "Derek, we are even." "Kendall, wait," he screamed, slamming his hand against the glass. "Don't leave me here. I am drowning." "Then learn to swim," I said. I hung up the phone. I turned my back on him. I walked out of the visitation room to the sound of him pounding on the glass, screaming my name. I didn't break stride. The final phase of my plan was purely administrative, but it was the most satisfying. I spent the next month systematically scrubbing the stain of Derek Brookstone from my financial identity. I filed an identity theft affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission, using the police report and the court documents from Derek's indictment. I disputed every single hard inquiry he had made on my credit report. The $200,000 loan he took out in my name removed. The maxed-out credit cards discharged as fraudulent. The bounced checks expunged. I sat on the phone with credit bureaus for hours, faxing documents, quoting statutes, and demanding corrections. It was tedious work. But it was the work I was born to do. I was surgically removing a tumor from my financial history. 30 days later, I received an alert on my phone. My credit score had been updated. 780. I was back in the tier of the credit-worthy. I was insurable. I was viable. The financial world is small, and news travels fast. The story of how I had dismantled a fraudulent trust transfer and exposed a laundering scheme from my dining room table had circulated among the quiet corridors of the banking industry. They didn't know all the details, but they knew I was the auditor who had caught what everyone else missed. My phone started ringing. Not debt collectors, headhunters. "Mrs. Brookstone," a recruiter from a top forensic accounting firm said. "We heard about the work you did on the Brookstone estate. That was impressive. We have a compliance director position open. The salary is $300,000 a year. We would like to interview you." I sat in my living room, looking at the offer letter in my email. "I am flattered," I said into the phone, "but I'm currently managing a private family office. However," I paused. I looked at the calendar. Lila was in school. I had free time, and I realized I missed the hunt. I missed the feeling of finding the truth hidden in the numbers. "I might be open to a consulting role," I said, "on my own terms, and my rate is $500 an hour." "Done," the recruiter said without hesitation. "When can you start?" I smiled. "Monday." I hung up the phone. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman looking back at me wasn't the scared housewife who had pawned a necklace to buy groceries. She wasn't the victim who had cried on the floor. She was Kendall Vance. She was the guardian of the trust. She was the CEO of her own life. I picked up my purse. I had a lunch date with Arthur Sterling to review the quarterly investment strategy for Lila's fund. Derek was in a cell. Learning the value of $200, Monica was in Ohio. Learning the value of a reputation, and I was walking out the door, knowing exactly what I was worth. I checked my bank app one last time. Checking account $25,000. Trust account $15 million. Debt zero. The audit was complete. The books were closed. And for the first time in 12 years, the numbers finally added up. Summer arrived in Oakhaven, not with a shout, but with a warm, steady breeze that seemed to sweep away the last lingering grayness of the winter. It had been 6 months since the day I walked out of the Ritz-Carlton with my head held high. And the world looked entirely different. The colors were sharper. The air tasted sweeter. Lila and I had moved into a new house 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. It was not a sprawling estate like the one Derek had prided himself on, nor was it the drafty rental that had smelled of desperation. It was a charming Dutch colonial on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It had a yellow front door, a fenced yard where Lila could run without supervision, and a kitchen that was always warm. It felt safe. That was the most important word in our vocabulary now. Safety. I stood at the kitchen island, chopping vegetables for a salad. Through the open window, I could hear Lila laughing. She was in the backyard playing fetch with Barnaby, the golden retriever puppy we had adopted last month. For a long time, I had worried that the trauma of that day in the ballroom, seeing her father in handcuffs, would leave a permanent scar. I had worried she would stop trusting, stop loving. But children are remarkably elastic. They bounce back when the weight is lifted off them. She hadn't mentioned Derek's name in 2 months. He had become a shadow, something that existed in the past tense, like a bad dream that fades when the morning light hits your eyes. I wiped my hands on a towel and checked my phone. A deposit notification. My monthly salary as the administrator of the Brookstone Trust had cleared. $20,833. It was a staggering amount of money for most people, but I treated it with the discipline of a monk. I didn't dip into the trust principal. That $15 million sat in a diversified portfolio, locked tight behind firewalls and legal structures, growing quietly for Lila's future. I lived entirely on my salary. I drove a sensible SUV. I shopped at the local market. I paid my bills on time. And every time I saw a zero balance on a credit card statement, I felt a thrill of satisfaction that no designer handbag could ever provide. But I wasn't just hoarding the money. I was using it to build something. I had leased a small, professional office space downtown, right next to the courthouse. The brass plaque on the door read Vance Asset Protection and Consulting. I wasn't just an auditor anymore. I was a shield. My business model was simple. I worked with women and some men who were entering marriages with significant assets, or who were navigating the murky waters of a high-conflict divorce. I taught them how to structure their finances so they could never be blindsided. I taught them how to read a tax return, how to spot hidden accounts, and how to ensure that if the love faded, the money didn't vanish with it. I walked into the living room where I had set up a projector for tonight's session. Every Tuesday evening, I hosted a free workshop at the community center called Financial Self-Defense. It was my way of paying it forward. That evening, the room was packed. 20 women sat in folding chairs, notebooks in hand. Some were young, wearing engagement rings that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. Others were older, with the tired eyes of women who suspect something is wrong but are too afraid to look. "Good evening," I said, standing at the front of the room. "My name is Kendall Vance, and I'm here to tell you that love is grand, but liquidity is power." I saw smiles ripple through the room. "How many of you know your partner's email password?" I asked. 3 hands went up. "How many of you know the login for your mortgage provider?" 5 hands. "How many of you have a bank account in your own name, at a different bank than your joint account, with enough money to pay for 3 months of rent?" No hands went up. "Okay," I said, picking up a dry erase marker. "That changes tonight. We are not planning for failure. We are planning for freedom, because you cannot be an equal partner if you are terrified of being destitute." For the next 2 hours, I taught them. I showed them how to pull their own credit reports. I showed them how to recognize the signs of financial infidelity. I saw the lights go on in their eyes. I saw the fear replaced by determination. When the class ended, a young woman named Sarah came up to me. She looked about the same age Monica had been, but her eyes were kind. "Thank you," she said quietly. "My fiancé gets angry when I ask about his investments. He says I wouldn't understand. After tonight, I realize that is a red flag, isn't it? It is a neon sign." "Sarah," I said gently, "trust, but verify. If he won't show you the books, he is hiding a story you might not want to read." She nodded, clutching her notebook like a shield. "I am going to ask to see the accounts tonight." "Good," I said. "Call me if you need help reading them." I drove home feeling a sense of purpose that warmed me more than the summer heat. I wasn't just the woman who destroyed Derek Brookstone. I was the woman who was preventing the next Derek Brookstone from happening. I pulled into the driveway and saw a familiar car parked at the curb. It was a silver sedan. practical and clean. Mark was leaning against the hood, holding a paper bag from the Thai place we both liked. Mark was the forensic accountant who had helped me trace the wire transfers during those dark nights 6 months ago. We had kept in touch. At first, it was professional me buying him dinner to thank him for risking his license. Then, it became coffee to discuss industry trends. Now, it was Tuesday night takeout. "You are late," Mark said, smiling as I got out of the car. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he looked at me with a respect that felt entirely different from the possessive way Derek used to look at me. "Class ran over," I said, unlocking the front door. There were a lot of questions about prenuptial agreements. "Romance is dead," Mark joked, following me into the kitchen. "Romance is fine," I countered, pulling plates from the cupboard. "Blind stupidity is dead." We ate at the kitchen island, talking about everything and nothing. We talked about Lila's science fair project she had won second place. By the way, we talked about a new fraud case Mark was working on involving a cryptocurrency scam. It was easy. It was safe. "So," Mark said, pausing with a dumpling on his fork, "did you see the news today?" I stopped chewing. "No, I have been busy. What happened?" Mark pulled his phone out and slid it across the counter. I looked at the screen. It was a local news article. The headline read, "Former finance executive sentenced to probation in high-profile fraud case." I read the text. Derek had cut a deal. Of course he had. He had provided information on a dozen other minor players in the Vostok network to avoid federal prison time. The judge had sentenced him to 5 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. "He is out," I said, my voice flat. "Read the rest," Mark said. I scrolled down. "While Mr. Brookstone has avoided incarceration, he faces significant civil liabilities. Sources indicate that he remains personally liable for outstanding debts to private creditors not covered by the plea agreement." "Private creditors," I whispered. "Vostok." "He is working at the municipal recycling center," Mark said, taking his phone back. "Picking up trash on the sorting line, $12 an hour. And the word on the street is that half his paycheck is being garnished by the court, and the other half, well, let's just say he has some very aggressive collectors watching his every move." I imagined Derek, in an orange safety vest, sorting through garbage, looking over his shoulder every time a black car drove past. He wasn't in a cage, but he wasn't free. He was living in a prison of fear. He would spend the rest of his life looking at shadows, wondering when the debt collectors would decide that he was worth more dead than alive. "And Monica?" I asked. "Gone," Mark said. "She skipped town 3 months ago, last I heard. She was waitressing in a diner in Nevada under a different name. She has judgments against her in 3 states. She can't open a bank account, can't get a credit card, can't sign a lease. She is a ghost." I nodded slowly. Justice wasn't always a gavel banging in a courtroom. Sometimes justice was a life reduced to cash-only transactions and looking over your shoulder. "Are you okay?" Mark asked, reaching out to touch my hand gently. I looked at him. I looked around my warm, bright kitchen. I thought about the $15 million safe in the trust. I thought about the women I had taught tonight. "I am better than okay," I said. "I am done with them. They don't exist in my world anymore." That weekend, I took Lila to the beach. It was a 2-hour drive to the coast, but we left early, singing along to pop songs on the radio with the windows down. We set up our blanket near the dunes. Lila ran straight for the water, her laughter carrying over the roar of the waves. I stood at the edge of the surf, letting the cold Atlantic water wash over my feet. The ocean didn't care about trust funds. It didn't care about fraud or betrayal. It just was, powerful, rhythmic, eternal. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath of salt air. For a long time, I had thought my worth was tied to my role as a wife. Then, when everything fell apart, I thought my power came from the money from the $15 million I had snatched from Derek's grasp. But standing there, with the wind whipping my hair across my face, I realized I had been wrong. The money was just a tool. It was a hammer, a shield, a lever. But it wasn't the source of my strength. My strength came from the moment I lay on the floor of my empty study and decided to stand up. It came from the nights I spent reading legal documents until my eyes burned. It came from the courage to walk into that ballroom in a red dress and burn my old life to the ground. I had walked through the fire and come out made of steel. "Mom!" "Look," Lila shouted, holding up a perfect white seashell. I smiled and waved. "It is beautiful, baby." I was free. Not just financially free, but emotionally free. I had no secrets. I had no fear. My phone buzzed in my beach bag. I almost ignored it. It was Saturday, after all. But old habits die hard. I walked over and picked it up. It was a number I didn't recognize. Area code 212, Manhattan. "Hello, this is Kendall Vance." "Ms. Vance?" a woman's voice said. It was cultured, smooth, but with an underlying tremor of anxiety that I recognized instantly. "My name is Catherine Delacroix. You don't know me, but I was given your number by Arthur Sterling." I stiffened. Catherine Delacroix, the wife of the CEO of Delacroix Industries, a billionaire. "I know who you are, Mrs. Delacroix," I said, shielding my eyes from the sun. "How can I help you?" "Arthur told me what you did," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He said, you are the only one who can find things that don't want to be found." I looked out at the ocean. I watched a seagull dive into the waves and emerge with a fish. "What are you looking for, Mrs. Delacroix?" "My husband is merging his company next month," she said. "But I found a second set of books in his study last night, and I think he's planning to leave the country with the acquisition capital, and he is planning to leave me and our 3 children behind with the debt." It was the same story, different zeros, different names, but the same story. A man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. A woman who was underestimated. I felt that familiar spark in my chest. The hunter's instinct, the auditor's thrill. "Do you have access to the documents?" I asked, my voice shifting into professional gear. "I took photos," she said, "but I don't know what they mean." "I do," I said. "Mrs. Delacroix, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Do not confront him. Do not act differently. Go to dinner with him tonight. Smile. Pour him wine." "And then?" she asked, sounding hopeful for the first time. "And then meet me at my office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I said, "Bring the photos, bring your tax returns, and bring your courage." "Can you help me?" she asked. I looked at Lila, who was writing her name in the sand with a stick. "I can do better than help you, Mrs. Delacroix," I said, a smile touching my lips. "I can help you audit him." I hung up the phone. The wind blew harder, tangling my hair. I didn't brush it back. I turned and walked toward my daughter, ready to build a sandcastle. The past was a ledger that had been balanced. The future was an open account, and business was booming. The last remnants of Derek Brookstone's existence in my life were contained in 3 cardboard boxes sitting on the floor of my attic. I had spent the weekend systematically purging the house. I donated his old golf clubs. I threw away the hideous abstract painting he had bought to impress a client. I shredded files that were no longer relevant to the IRS or the divorce decree, but there was one box I had hesitated to open. It wasn't Derek's. It was a box labeled Mother's Estate, Keep Private. Derek had brought it with him when we moved into our first house 12 years ago. He had tossed it in the back of a closet and told me never to touch it. He said it was just sentimental trash from his mother, Eleanor, who had died a year before we met. He said he would go through it someday. Someday never came. I sat on the dusty floorboards, the rain drumming a steady rhythm against the roof tiles. I sliced the tape with a box cutter, inside. There were no jewels or bonds. It was a collection of memories. Photo albums of a young Derek before the greed hardened his features. A silver rattle, and at the bottom, wrapped in a silk scarf, was a leather-bound journal. I picked it up. The leather was cracked with age. Smelling of lavender and old paper, I opened it. It was Eleanor's diary from the last year of her life. I felt a pang of guilt. This was an invasion of privacy. But then I remembered that I was now the legal custodian of her legacy. If anyone had a right to know the woman whose money had saved my daughter, it was me. I began to read. Eleanor was not the stiff, formal matriarch Derek had described. She was sharp, funny, and deeply sad. She wrote about her loneliness. She wrote about her late husband's coldness. And most of all, she wrote about Derek. July 14th, 1998, Derek came to visit today. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He asked about the estate planning. He asked if the trust could be accessed early if he wanted to start a business. I looked at my son and saw a stranger. He has his father's charm, but he has a hole inside him where his conscience should be. He thinks money is a scorecard. He doesn't understand that it is a responsibility. I turned the pages, mesmerized. She had seen him clearly even then. She knew. August 30th, 1998. I met with Arthur Sterling today. We finalized the morality clause. Arthur thinks it is too harsh. He says I am ruling from the grave. I told him I am not ruling. I am protecting. If Derek marries, God help the woman, he will view her as an acquisition, not a partner. I need to make sure that if he destroys his family, he doesn't get to keep the kingdom. My hands trembled. She had written the clause for me. She had never met me, but she had written it for the future wife she knew would inevitably be betrayed. I reached the final entry, dated 2 days before she died. A folded piece of thick, cream-colored stationery was clipped to the page. On the front, in elegant cursive, it read, "To the woman who is strong enough to stop him." I held my breath. I unfolded the letter. My dear daughter-in-law, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means my son has failed you. It means he has tried to destroy you, and you have found the strength to use my trust to stop him. I am sorry for the pain he caused you. I raised him, but I could not fix him. However, there is one final secret I kept from Derek, and even from the Board of Trustees. They believe the guardianship protocol simply transfers management of the funds to you until the child comes of age. They believe you are just a steward. They are wrong. Attached to this letter is the reference to the fail-safe codicil, filed under seal with the state probate court 30 years ago. It states clearly, in the event that the primary beneficiary is removed from the trust due to malicious deprivation of his spouse, the trust shall be immediately dissolved, and the entire principal shall transfer, tax-free and without restriction, to the sole ownership of the spouse as her personal property. I did not want a board of old men telling you how to spend the money to save your family. I did not want you to have to ask for permission to be free. If you were smart enough to catch him, and brave enough to stop him, then you are the true heir of the Brookstone legacy. The money is not a loan. It is yours. Do some good with it. Eleanor. The letter slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain. The silence in the attic felt heavy, but not oppressive. It felt like a presence. I wasn't just the trustee. I wasn't an employee of the estate. I owned it. I picked up my phone and dialed Arthur Sterling. It was Sunday, but I knew he would answer. "Kendall," his voice was raspy, "is everything all right?" "Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "I found the fail-safe codicil." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, a sigh that sounded like 50 years of tension releasing at once. "I wondered if you ever would," Arthur said softly. "Eleanor made me swear on her deathbed never to reveal it unless you found it yourself. She said it was the final test. She said if you were just looking for a payout, you would settle for the alimony. But if you were digging for the truth, you would find the diary." "You knew?" I asked. "You knew the whole time I was reporting to you, asking for permission to pay the mortgage, that the money was actually mine." "I knew," Arthur admitted, "and I watched you. I watched you manage that fund with more integrity in 6 months than Derek showed in 40 years. Eleanor was right about you. Kendall, you are the one." "What happens now?" I asked. Now. Arthur chuckled. Now I retire. The board is dissolved effective immediately. The $15 million and the accrued interest is yours. Transfer it where you like, burn it, donate it. It is your property. Kendall, you answer to no one. I hung up the phone. I sat in the attic and let the reality wash over me. I thought about the monthly salary I had been so grateful for. I thought about the budget spreadsheets I submitted to the board every quarter. I was free, truly, completely free. I didn't have to report to a board of men. I didn't have to justify my daughter's dental bills. I didn't have to worry that if I made a wrong investment, they would strip me of the guardianship. The money was mine. I walked down the stairs, clutching the diary to my chest. I went into the kitchen where Lila was drawing a picture at the table. "Mom," she asked, looking up. "You look different." "I feel different, baby," I said. I went to my laptop. I logged into the trust portal. I entered the code from the codicil that Arthur had texted me a moment later. The screen flashed. Status update. Trust dissolved. Assets transferred to personal estate. Owner Kendall Brookstone. The balance stared back at me. $15,400,000 and change. I didn't feel the urge to buy a yacht. I didn't feel the urge to go shopping. I thought about the women in my Tuesday night class. I thought about Sarah, who was afraid to ask her fiancé about his bank account. I thought about the women living in the shelter I had helped fund. I opened a new tab. I searched for the Secretary of State's business registration portal. I typed in a new name, the Brookstone Freedom Fund. I allocated $10 million to it immediately. It would not just be a shelter. It would be a war chest. I would hire lawyers for women who couldn't afford them. I would hire forensic accountants to find the money their husbands hid. I would provide zero-interest loans for women starting businesses after leaving abusive marriages. I would turn Eleanor's legacy into a weapon for every woman who had ever been told she was crazy for asking where the money went. The next morning, I drove Lila to school. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. After I dropped her off, I didn't go to my office. I just drove. I found myself on the county highway, the road that stretched out toward the industrial outskirts of town. I knew where I was going, though I hadn't consciously planned it. I slowed down as I approached mile marker 14. There was a white van parked on the shoulder. A group of men in orange reflective vests were walking along the ditch, spearing trash with pointed sticks. They were supervised by a sheriff's deputy leaning against his cruiser, drinking coffee. I slowed my car to a crawl. I saw him. He was thinner than I remembered. His hair was shaved close to his skull. The orange vest hung loosely on his frame. He was struggling with a heavy black garbage bag, dragging it through the tall grass. Derek, the man who had flown private jets, the man who had worn $3,000 suits, the man who had looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing without him. He looked up as my car approached. It was a brand-new luxury SUV, gleaming black in the sunlight. He couldn't see me through the tinted windows, but he stared at the car. I saw a flash of recognition, or maybe just longing. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of a dirty glove. For a moment, I considered rolling down the window. I considered stopping. I considered letting him see me, letting him see the diamond earrings I had bought for myself, letting him see the peace on my face. I could have thrown a $100 bill out the window, just to see if he would run for it. But then I remembered Eleanor's diary. He is hollow. If I stopped, I would be feeding that hollow space. I would be giving him my attention. And my attention was now the most expensive thing I owned. He couldn't afford it. I looked at him one last time. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't even feel pity. I felt nothing. He was just a part of the landscape, like the discarded soda cans he was picking up. He was refuse. I pressed my foot onto the accelerator. The engine purred, a low, powerful sound. I watched him shrink in my rearview mirror. He was a small orange dot against the gray road, and then he was gone. I turned my eyes back to the windshield. The road ahead was wide and open. The sun was shining on the pavement, creating a mirage of water in the distance. I turned up the radio. Lila's favorite song was playing. I whispered into the quiet luxury of my car, a message to the man I had left in the dust. Thank you for leaving. Derek, that was the best deal of my life. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and ultimate freedom. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below, so we can see how far this family reaches. If you enjoyed seeing Kendall turn the tables, please hit that like button, subscribe to Family Revenge Stories, and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need to hear it. Stay strong, and protect your heart and your wallet.